Welcome back to Arkansas, where we try to make sense of the issues affecting Arkansans. Today, we're going to talk about what's on your 2024 ballot, specifically Ballot Issue 1, the Lottery Proceed Funding for Vocational Technical School Scholarships and Grants Amendment. Issue 1 is a legislatively referred amendment, so it was sent to the voters by the legislature, and if passed, it would become part of the Arkansas State Constitution. It would supersede all other state-level laws and could only be changed by another amendment, either from a citizen's petition or referred by the legislature. This one is far more straightforward than most ballot issues are, so let's just dive right in. Lotteries are games where multiple people buy tickets which represent a possibility to win something, and then the winner is decided through some form of random chance. And a critical part of lotteries is that the amount of money raised from ticket sales is more than the combined cost of running the lottery and the prizes paid out. So lotteries are a net gain for whoever puts them on. In the US, lotteries have a long history of funding civic projects like schools, roads, and bridges as an alternative to taxes. But in the mid-1800s, a combination of lottery scandals and moral panic caused a shift in public opinion. Many states banned lotteries, and that included Arkansas. In 1874, when Arkansas wrote and adopted the state constitution we still use today, they included Article 19, Section 14, which says, "No lottery shall be authorized by this state, nor shall the sale of lottery tickets be allowed." And that's the way things stayed for over 100 years. But in the 1970s and 80s, multiple states began to bring back lotteries, many of them to fund higher education scholarships. The idea of an Arkansas lottery gained traction with the public, but it would require a constitutional amendment to overwrite the ban. In 1996, there was a citizen-initiated amendment to legalize lotteries and allow a casino in Hot Springs. And in 2000, there was another to legalize lotteries and allow casinos in 6 counties. Both made it to the ballot, but then failed quite badly. But in 2006, a man named Bill Halter ran for lieutenant governor, and his major campaign promise was to write and get passed an Arkansas Scholarship Lottery Amendment, with no casinos attached.
The lottery itself is merely a funding mechanism. The scholarships are what's important.
While the lottery idea was popular, it also had some loud detractors. Some folks were just morally against the lottery, while others argued those scholarships should be funded by taxes, which scale with income. Lottery tickets are far more likely to be purchased by lower-income families, so a lottery effectively shifts the tax burden onto them. But as Bill Halter pointed out, lotteries were legal in nearly every bordering state, and tens of thousands of Arkansans were already crossing state lines to play.
Arkansans that do that are now subsidizing the education of Tennessee kids and Missouri kids and Oklahoma kids and kids in Texas and Louisiana, and I just think it's something that we ought to decide whether or not we'd like to have a lottery here in Arkansas and keep those funds in the state to be devoted to the education of Arkansas students.
Halter won his race, and the next year worked with the Arkansas House and Senate to write an amendment which would have created lottery scholarships for both traditional colleges and universities and vocational programs. However, the bill was seen as too controversial and died in committee. So instead, Halter wrote a petition for a citizen-initiated amendment, and that one did not include vocational or technical schools. But what it did do was pass overwhelmingly with voters in 2008. That amendment remains part of the state constitution today. And here's what it says. The General Assembly, that's the legislature, is allowed to establish, operate, and regulate state lotteries. The money gained from those lotteries can only pay for its own operating expenses and prizes and for scholarships and grants. Those have to go to Arkansas citizens attending public or private, nonprofit, 2-year and 4-year colleges and universities, which are located in Arkansas and certified by the legislature. The legislature can also set more specific criteria for which students qualify, and the scholarships and grants have to supplement, not supplant, existing funding, meaning the state is supposed to keep funding education programs as if the lottery doesn't exist, and treat it as a bonus. Once all the expenses, scholarships, and grants are paid, if there's any money left over, it stays in the lottery fund for the next year. The legislature cannot use it to pay for anything else. That amendment became part of our state constitution in 2008. and in 2009, the legislature set the qualifications, including minimum GPA and test scores. Students who met those requirements and maintained certain grades and credit hours were given $5,000 a year for 4-year programs or $2,500 a year for 2-year programs. Ticket sales began that fall, along with advertising focused heavily on how much good the scholarships would do.
The Arkansas Scholarship Lottery starts September 28th. Proceeds will provide scholarships for Arkansas students to continue their education at 2- and 4-year Arkansas colleges. And that gives our students something to celebrate.
The first scholarships were awarded in fall of 2010. The scholarship amounts had been set using estimates for lottery sales and scholarship participation. Those numbers were based on available data, including programs in other states, but ultimately they were just an estimate. And, as it turns out, not a great one.
Lottery finance scholarships may soon run out of money. The department says it has to dip into emergency reserve funds now to cover academic challenge scholarship costs.
Just 2 years after the program started, it had to use emergency funds to cover scholarships. So in 2013, the legislature cut the benefits back significantly. 4-year students would get $2,000 as freshmen, then $3,000, $4,000, and $5,000 for the following years. 2-year students would get a flat $2,000 each year, and the legislature put a cap on scholarships for students not enrolling straight out of high school. But it wasn't enough. The program had to use emergency funds again the next year. So in 2015, the legislature made the first-year scholarship $1,000 and the second year $4,000, lowering their cost on students who drop out after 1 year. They also rewrote the rules for which scholarships get funded in years when the lottery can't pay for them all. Funds first go to students who are continuing an existing scholarship and are studying in specific high-demand fields in order of who's closest to graduating. Then they go to students continuing scholarships in other fields. Funds only go to new students after that and are prioritized by ACT scores. If a decision has to be made between students with the same ACT score, it's determined by lottery. Those rules remain largely the same today. But despite all that fuss over how much money students get each year, scholarships are actually a pretty small chunk of where your lottery money goes. During the 2023 fiscal year, the Arkansas Lottery made over $607 million from ticket sales. Of that, about $417 million went to paying out prizes, and about $83 million went to administrative expenses and other costs. The rest was transferred to the Department of Education, and the majority of it, just over $74 million, was paid out in scholarships. $74 million out of $608 million. To put it another way, in 2023, for every dollar spent on a lottery ticket, only about 12 cents went to scholarships. The main scholarship funded with that money, the one we described earlier, is called the Academic Challenge Scholarship. As of 2023, there is a big bonus tacked on called the Governor's Distinguished Scholarship for students with especially high GPAs and test scores, as well as National Merit Scholars. It also partially funds many smaller scholarships and grants. In 2023, lottery scholarships went to nearly 49,000 Arkansas students. So that's how the program works now. But how would Issue 1 change that? Let's take a look at the language of the amendment. Issue 1 would cut the part of the lottery rules limiting awards to students at 2- and 4-year colleges and universities, and instead create a list of higher education institutions where students could use those scholarship funds. The list would include the same schools which are covered now and would add 2 more kinds: public or private vocational technical schools and public or private technical institutes. Note those places still have to be located in Arkansas and certified by the state. And that's it. That's the entirety of Issue 1. But what are those 2 new categories? And why add them now? Vocational and technical schools, sometimes collectively called trade schools, are higher education institutions geared towards hands-on training in one or more specific trades. And unlike colleges and universities, they don't require general education credits, and rather than degrees, are often focused on certifications. The state of Arkansas used to operate a collection of vocational technical schools, but in 1991, they converted 11 of those into technical colleges and allowed the rest to merge into their nearest community college. The resulting colleges like ASU Newport, Black River Tech, and Pulaski Tech are already able to receive lottery scholarships, as are community colleges which offer vocational training and certification. That means the trade schools in Arkansas, not currently covered by the lottery scholarship, are mostly privately run, for-profit, and focused on just one area. Issue 1 does not include a definition for the new types of schools it covers, but the Arkansas Division of Higher Education has proposed one. It limits them to schools eligible for federal student aid and headquartered in Arkansas. If we use the FAFSA codes for Arkansas-based federal funding eligible schools and eliminate the ones already listed as eligible for the main lottery scholarship, that leaves 34 schools which might be included in Issue 1. Now, it's entirely possible some of these schools won't be eligible or that more are missing from this list, but given no set definition, it's at least a starting point to get some idea of what kinds of schools Issue 1 might add. Of those, 27 are schools of beauty, cosmetology, hair design, or barbering. 2 are health-focused, and there's 1 each for theology, massage, and welding. Finally, there are 2 multidisciplinary schools, Shorter College, which is not on the list for the Academic Challenge Scholarship but has received other lottery-funded scholarships, and Northwest Technical Institute, which seems to have inspired Issue 1. It's the only remaining state-owned, federally funded technical school which did not convert to a college or merge with a community college. So in 2021, the legislature tried to add them as the sole exception to the existing limits, but was told the state constitution would not allow that. So, in 2023, Issue 1 was referred to voters by the legislature through an almost eerily uniform vote, and with no one at any point speaking up in opposition. But that doesn't mean there aren't any arguments against it. So, let's talk about them. One argument against Issue 1 is that it might be a bad idea to spread out existing lottery funding among more people without a plan to bring in more funding. We saw how devastatingly wrong the budget predictions were when the state first set up the lottery scholarship, so what happens if adding in these extra schools puts us right back in the same place? If we have more students than scholarships, the only answer now is to fund fewer students or give less to each student. But where in the hierarchy of funding will these new schools go? The legislature gets to make that call, and it can make a big difference. Let's say the state gives continuing scholarships for trade school students priority over new scholarship students of any kind. In budget shortfall years, that would mean every student continuing in a trade school is 1 less incoming freshman eligible for a scholarship. On the other hand, if they put trade schools at the bottom of the hierarchy, then they'll be the first ones cut when the budget comes up short. And again, with more students to cover but no plan for more income, shortfalls seem more likely. Here's another argument against Issue 1. If the scholarship lottery is in a position to give out more funds, why not increase the payout for existing qualified students? The total scholarship payout per student has not changed since 2013, $14,000 over 4 years. But inflation means that number should be closer to $19,000 to have the same buying power. Averaged out over 4 years, the lottery scholarship pays $3,500 a year. In 2013, that would have paid for just under half of a school year for an on-campus undergraduate student at the University of Arkansas. But in 2025, that will pay for a third of a year. And the story is the same at other major colleges across the state. Tuition will continue to rise, and as long as the lottery scholarship pays out the same flat rate, it will become less and less helpful. So some folks argue it would make more sense to increase the payout of the existing program rather than add the expense of more students. Also, the existing rules only allow scholarships to go to colleges and universities which are not for profit. But Issue 1 allows the newly added trade schools to be for profit, and most of them are. So let's say Issue 1 passes and gives students at trade schools $2,000 a year. What's to stop those schools from just hiking tuition by $2,000 and pocketing the scholarship money as profit? Also, trade schools have a significantly higher dropout rate than colleges and universities. If these scholarships cause prices to rise, then every dropout is potentially saddled with even more debt. The legislature could have included some protections, like a cap on yearly tuition increases, but they didn't. And while it's possible they'll add some later, if you're the kind of person who doesn't generally trust them to get things like this right, that could be a huge problem with Issue 1. And here's a final argument against Issue 1. The state could just pay for technical and vocational scholarships out of tax funds rather than relying on the lottery. We've already covered how the lottery takes what could be a more evenly distributed tax burden and instead puts it disproportionately on the poorest Arkansans. We've also shown how only a small percentage of each dollar you spend on a lottery ticket actually goes to those scholarships. It would cost significantly less to just pay for the scholarships directly, so why not fund these new scholarships through existing revenue? Arkansas is currently running a significant surplus, so significant in fact that we keep using it as a reason to cut taxes. This year, the legislature passed a cut on the top income tax brackets for both individuals and corporations. After the first year, it's estimated those cuts will lose the state $322 million in tax revenue annually. That is enough money to fund all of the 2023 lottery scholarships 4 times over and still have $26 million left. Even if you believe these tax cuts are a good thing, they could have been just a fraction smaller and left enough money to fund the trade school scholarships. And even with the cuts in place, the state is still running a surplus it could use to fund them. Instead, the state is cutting taxes on the wealthiest Arkansans while asking lottery ticket buyers, who tend to be poorer, to fund an expanded scholarship program. Generally speaking, scholarships are not more likely to be used by poorer Arkansans. In fact, there's a strong correlation between wealthy families and higher scores on standardized tests, one of the only requirements for the scholarship. By expanding the program, Issue 1 would continue our trend of asking the poorest Arkansans to engage in gambling to fund a scholarship which benefits all income brackets and could easily be covered by existing state funds. So, if you believe that we should not add more students to the lottery fund without first finding a plan to bring in more income, or if you think we should focus on fixing the existing program first, or you think we should fund vocational and technical scholarships through existing revenue sources instead of adding them into the lottery fund, then you'll want to vote no on Issue 1. Now let's talk about the arguments in favor of Issue 1. The easiest argument for Issue 1 is that vocational and technical schools really should have been part of the lottery scholarship program in the first place. They were a part of the legislative bill for the lottery, and it's not clear why they were left out of the Citizens Amendment. But the most likely reason is bias. For a long time, some Americans viewed attending a 4-year college as a necessary step on the road to success, and by contrast, they viewed trade schools as a kind of fallback option, and therefore less deserving of support. But trade schools are a better option for a lot of people. Because they focus so thoroughly on one specific set of skills and involve hands-on learning with experts in the field, people who complete trade school are more likely to start a career immediately afterwards than people who attend colleges or universities. And while trade school students on average make less money than college graduates, they also on average have significantly less student loan debt. There are plenty of other advantages too, but the point is any stigma around trade school is unfounded. So some folks argue that leaving them out of the lottery scholarships was a mistake, and Issue 1 would correct that. We talked before about how funding these scholarships with a lottery shifts the financial burden to poorer Arkansans. Meanwhile, that group is not, per capita, more likely to take advantage of the scholarships. However, they are more likely to go to trade school. So some folks say it makes sense that scholarships disproportionately funded by poorer Arkansans should be able to pay for the schools they are more likely to attend. Also, some of the arguments against Issue 1 focused on whether it should be funded other ways, but of course, that hasn't happened, and there's no reason to assume it would anytime soon. The option of Issue 1 isn't multiple possible ways to fund trade school scholarships. It's fund them with the lottery or don't fund them. The same thing goes for arguments about the award amounts not being high enough. Voting for Issue 1 does not lock in any of those details. It just provides more students access to the program. However, it changes in the future. And, while we're offering counter-arguments, concerns about spreading out the existing funds assumes adding trade schools would significantly increase the total number of scholarships. But the actual number of new students added by Issue 1 is likely to be incredibly small. Private trade schools generally have lower levels of enrollment compared to colleges and universities. Most of the ones we listed earlier have fewer than 200 students, and some have fewer than 100. And only a fraction of those would be eligible for scholarships. When the legislature tried to add an exception for Northwest Tech, their fiscal impact statement estimated about 15% of its students would be eligible, or only 32 students, and Northwest is one of the larger schools. Still, even if we grossly overestimate and assume 32 new students from 34 new trade schools, that's just over 1,000 new scholarships, compared to the 49,000 given out last year. And the existing scholarship already pays out less for two-year students, and trade school programs last no longer than that. So it's reasonable to assume trade school scholarships would also be at a reduced rate. Folks in favor of Issue 1 say that altogether, this means adding trade schools would barely change the necessary funding for the lottery scholarship. And if that's the case, there's no reason not to do it. Finally, let's not forget we aren't just talking about intangible scholarships, but people. Our neighbors, our fellow Arkansans who want to try and better themselves. And in doing so, they make our state better. We all collectively voted to legalize the lottery in Arkansas only under the condition that it offsets any potential harm through the good of providing scholarships. And we generally agree that a better educated population is a net good. Even if cosmetology or welding or barbering aren't careers you might choose, it still benefits us all for those folks to receive professional training. And it helps our economy if they come out of that experience with less debt. And unlike a generalized education at a four-year college, trade schools are focused on learning a skill set and turning it into a career. Some folks say this makes trade schools even more deserving of funding because they provide a direct path from student to part of our community. So expanding scholarships to cover them is an easy change that benefits our whole state. So, if you believe that trade school students should have been part of the lottery scholarships from the beginning, or if you believe that any fears about adding them are unfounded, or if you believe expanding the scholarship program is a good way to invest in our state, then you'll want to vote yes on Issue 1. And that's it. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget, early voting starts October 21st and Election Day is November 5th. If you like this video, share it with somebody. You can also check out our other ballot issue videos and our content on Arkansas history and politics. And if you want to help us keep making these videos, consider supporting Arkansans on Patreon. With Patreon, you can set up exactly how much you want to give to the channel each month, down to as little as $1. And you can change that amount or cancel at any time. A big thanks to our current GoRo level supporters, Tim in Vegas and Caldwell, plus all these other folks you see on screen now. Thanks again, and see you next time for more Arkansans.